Greetings, friends, and welcome to my channel, The Dimensional Liaison. This is my inaugural episode, and I am going to talk about a few subjects of interest to me. I don't know if they're of interest to anyone else, but I hope that they are. I'm going to be talking about subjects that have to do with the metaphysical world, with vibrational healing, perhaps, with what's going on in the collective consciousness. What's going on with human evolution. And I want to start off with just a little bit of a discussion about what's going on with human evolution, because I do believe we are evolving as a species right now. And it's not the way people sort of expect evolution to look, because it's a more of a conscious evolution. We're evolving from our nervous system on up. We're not sprouting gills or learning how to fly or, any of that superpower stuff. Although, in a way, developing your vibrational capacity to function as an intuitive being that is sensitive to energy and vibration, that is kind of a superpower. Now, it is a superpower if only a few people have it, I guess, but here's the reality. All of us have the capacity to develop those kinds of gifts. So why is it that only some of us actually bother doing that? What's going on here? And why are those gifts considered so risky to even talk about? I mean, it's getting better nowadays. People are shifting in how they discuss such issues. But if I start talking about energy and shifting in the collective consciousness and so on, people's eyes glaze over when I get going on that kind of stuff. So I thought, I'll just do this on a YouTube channel, and those of you who are interested can come and find me. That seems to make more sense. All right. Where was I? I was talking about evolution. And what does it mean that only some of us are developing our psychic gifts? Well, here's the thing. We're a mammal, basically, on a planet full of mammals, other mammals. And we are well aware that in the world of nature, every animal out there has very specific gifts or ways that they interface with their environment. When we observe mammals in the wild, they appear to have miraculous types of psychic gifting. For example, when the birds all stop singing when there's a predator in the forest, how do they know? Maybe they didn't all see them. What about birds when they are all turning at the same instant and they swoop around? Fish in schools of fish, how do they know to do that? Well, it's energy. So, as an animal, humans also have a vast array of gifts and abilities to read energy. That's part of our natural gifting as an animal that has evolved on this planet, where at many times during our history, we had to be really aware of our surroundings. We had to figure out ways to survive. And so how do you do that when you're a mammal? You develop very finely honed intuition. You learn to tune into the energy of your surroundings. You learn to cultivate presence. And you can become very, very accurate about figuring out where the danger is coming from, or what direction do we need to go in order to find water or food, whatever it is, good hunting. So we have all these abilities, and yet since we've become civilized, and I put that in quotes because, well, we'll talk about that later. I don't think we're particularly that civilized yet. We look really complex from the surface, but the way we treat one another is absolutely brutal. And I don't believe that a truly civilized species would continue doing that. So until we address whatever is going on with us internally as a species that makes us continue to behave in such inhumane and cruel ways towards one another, simply on the basis of like, what God do you believe in and what color is your skin? I mean, this is ridiculous. We are technically the same species, and yet for thousands of years we've been doing this. So what the fuck, humans? Come on. Like, we can do better than this. So these gifts that we have were considered to be a waste of time in the current system of civilization. Why? Because we have a civilizational construct that is based on an unsustainable and a complete misconception of how the universe functions in energy. By which I mean that patriarchy, based on the premise of male supremacy, it's ass backwards. I'm sorry. The generative creative principle is how all creation originates in the universe. Once it's expressed into the physical, that's where the yang or the masculine principle takes over and builds things or whatever it is that men like to do. But it has to do with the external expression. Whereas the feminine principle has to do with receptivity, that generative process, the void of incubating creation. Matriarchal societies, which existed before 6,000 years ago, and we had an unprecedented, 20 or 25,000 years of abundant, flourishing civilization, for which we have a lot of archaeological evidence that has been mostly ignored because it didn't fit in with the narrative of a patriarchal male god. So we are starting to learn finally about those civilizations and about how they functioned, what they prioritized, what was important to them. And a lot of those ruins are extremely well preserved and contain a lot of information about their spiritual practices, what they felt was important. One of the really important observations about those civilizations is they did not have any implements of war handy. And let me just turn my phone down here because we don't want to be interrupted by this. Sorry about that. So, what was I saying? We were talking about generally the dysfunction of patriarchal civilization. You might have noticed that it is sort of reaching its natural, and we're in the too big to fail phase of patriarchy right now, and yet it is going under, and it is crushing itself under its own weight. It is literally a system that was designed to accumulate and concentrate wealth and energy. So it is a parasitical system at best. I would characterize it as being more vampiric because it's consciously built that way. Consciously built to steal the labor and energy of people. It's literally a civilizational construct that is built on the premise that it's okay to use people's life force up in the service of a very tiny percentage of elite rulers. Now, I don't know how that sounds to you, but that sounds like absolute bonkers to me. I mean, what? What? Why are we living like this still? What civilized species can you imagine in the galaxy would be successful if we continue to function like this? We are literally on the verge of blowing ourselves to smithereens or collapsing our ecosystem, or maybe, losing the ionosphere because we want to fuck around with that too. You know, we do not have an attitude of reverence towards this unbelievably beautiful and miraculous planet that we live on. We treat it like an inert lump of resources that we can despoil and pillage however we like. The level of entitlement is staggering. Now, anybody who's been involved in energy work for any length of time will be well aware by this point that there is a sentience to this planet. When you tap into it on the energy level, you get a response. The planet is aware of the beings living on it and what we do. You might think I'm crazy, but that's fine. We can agree to disagree on that. I happen to think the planet is quite sentient. And it is minimally a highly complex system. I mean, let's face it, we don't really understand what sentience is anyway, do we? We haven't really had any clear discussions about it. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going out there with AIs, but do we really understand what universal consciousness means? If we accept the idea that we are all part, that we are all connected, that we are all part of one universe, that we are somehow, there's this unified field of consciousness going on, then what is our individual consciousness mean compared to the whole? Lots of big questions here. So let's go back to what we were talking about, patriarchy, and the focus on power and control, the accumulation of power. And now that's control. It's not really power, it's power over. And so control over the external world comes from a place of fear. The people who decided that they needed to govern and function from a place of power that required control over the external world did so because they were scared. That always gets us into trouble. Fear always gets you into trouble. Now, fear is useful if you're in a life and death situation, but if you're not, why are you afraid? What are you afraid of? Feeling things? Having empathy? Lots of people are afraid of that. They don't want to deal with any of that emotional stuff. So they are fine with hurting other people because they don't feel it anymore. So this entire system has been built this way. And we have collectively been progressively, generation after generation, numbed more and more to the horrific impact of how this system impacts the world and the people living in the system. Sure, we are always presented with this idea that the big dream is that you too could one day be rich. You too could one day have that big success. But realistically, that's never going to be possible for everybody. It's only reserved for a very small percentage of people, and by people that the system deems to be acceptable. In other words, currently, the way the system is functioning is favoritizing white people, people of Caucasian descent. And not even all of us, really, basically. If you're too swarthy, you're not included in the club. I mean, the way that we categorize one another, the way that we judge one another, it's horrific. And the only reason is to keep us divided and unaware, busy squabbling amongst ourselves for scarce resources, while there are people currently literally trying to become trillionaires. I mean, to what end? To go to Mars? Okay, that's useful. We don't need that. What we need is a humane world where people understand that we have a reverent relationship with the planet, that we are in a place of divine stewardship, that we need to be living in a place of balance, in honesty and truth, in how we connect and communicate with one another. So, one of the ways that patriarchy has maintained control is by skewing the ways that we communicate, taking control over that. Religions are generally developed as part of this overall system as ways to control people. So, yeah, they're based on little small pieces of the truth on a spiritual level, but they're not particularly truthful. We have been overly focused on the yang expression, the external. So we've spent centuries embellishing and developing technology into more and more refined and destructive forms, instead of actually focusing our ingenuity and our brilliance on improving the living conditions for the majority of humanity. No, we're making fancier and fancier inventions so that everybody can carry a phone around, a little mini computer in their pocket, and we can talk about sending ships to Mars or wherever. You know, lots of control and hoarding of resources is going on here. Let's see. So we don't really have much of a comprehension of the energetic realities of how this place functions, how reality functions as a species. Yeah, there are a lot of individuals that have a pretty good grasp on it, and yet they're usually seen as weirdos or crackpots or, that's just woo-woo shit. What are you talking about? Well, maybe the ultimate frontier in technology is not to continue developing on the external, which is where we've been focused. Maybe this is the next frontier of technology. Because when you understand how sophisticated the human instrument is, this body, these physical bodies that we have, we function on electricity, electrical impulses that fire our nervous system, little sparks of electricity. And you know what that means? That means we have an electromagnetic field. Every human does. Every living being does. That's one of the ways that we sense our environment. That electromagnetic field that surrounds us is a highly sophisticated sensory instrument. And we haven't got a frickin' clue how to use it yet. Most of us. We have a good instinctive understanding. Some of us do, anyway. Some of the more obvious abilities that humans are born with, empathy, love. Babies already know how to be empathic from the moment that they emerge from the womb. They know how to connect with people. They come from a place of pure love consciousness, pure union consciousness, unified consciousness. They don't see themselves as separate beings. They just make an instant connection, and then immediately, whap, they get met with negativity, resentment, sense of judgment, revulsion if they mess up their diapers and somebody doesn't want to deal with it. This is what babies are met with before they even learn how to talk. They are dealing with a grown-up's shit. and we have the nerve to complain about their diapers. It's a tiny little helpless, I don't know how many millions of old being of energy and light that has suddenly been funneled into this tiny little helpless wrinkled body. And they don't even know how to operate or what the local language is yet. They're highly sensitive. I mean, if you've ever looked into the eyes of a newborn baby, you know that they're ancient. So, how can we do better? I think this is a conversation we need to have, not just on an individual level, but on a collective level. I see a lot of people individually going in for therapy and learning about themselves, getting to know what makes them tick, what makes them stop, what blocks them from reaching their potential. They're learning how to reclaim themselves. They're learning how to reclaim their gifting, their power, their innate power, their worth. They're claiming their sovereignty. And that is true freedom. It's not the illusion of freedom that is packaged and presented to us by organizations that want us to stay in place so that they continue feeding off of our energy and our labor and our money that we create, the wealth and the abundance that we create by our own labor and efforts and creativity gets funneled upward so somebody else can enjoy the fruits of all of our labor. I mean, who's happy with this world? The people at the very top, certainly, but for most of the rest of us, we know there's something profoundly wrong with this system. So on an individual level, we have all kinds of people, and it's becoming more and more considered accepted to have a therapist and be, people talk about these things now. They talk about energy hygiene. It's a fascinating example of how the language has adapted to talk about how you manage your own energy, with a recognition that things that you carry in your energy field, in your thoughts, has an impact on the other people around you, people that you connect with. If you don't deal with the garbage you're carrying around, it's like you haven't showered for a year and you walk into the room and everybody's like, no. How can we do better? These are all things that I am going to be talking about on upcoming episodes, and I invite you guys to please leave a comment. If you have curiosity about any particular area, if you have questions that you would like answers to, or at least let's start a conversation about these things. What's going on with humanity evolving? Are the AIs involved? What's it going to look like if patriarchy collapses and capitalism collapses? How are we going to rebuild? Who's going to be a part of that? I mean, we're going to have to step up, basically. I think that's what it boils down to. Lots of, we are capable. We're a brilliant species. We're very smart monkeys. I don't understand why we're not capable of living in a way that is humane to everyone on the planet. We're capable of imagining those things. Look at Star Trek. People have written books and TV shows and movies describing these utopian societies and systems, and sure, they're not perfect. However, they are a lot more humane than what we have going on right now. Now, granted, a lot of them still are clearly patriarchally based, which, honestly, I don't think that we are going to see any progress in human civilization until we acknowledge that patriarchy has to go. It is not a viable system. And in fact, it is completely, it's incorrect. The physics doesn't work. The math ain't mathing. We're done with it. We clearly can see that it's not working, and I know that's going to piss off a lot of dudes, but sorry, it is the truth. And it's not that I'm advocating a system where only women are in charge. No, we're not just flipping the system in reverse and having a power structure that involves more control. That is not how matriarchy functions. So what we're talking about is a system that functions with a different set of values. So instead of the value system that glorifies individual merit and the illusion of freedom that involves control over the environment and entitlement to literally cause damage based on some kind of genetic lottery, we need to stop with that kind of bullshit. We are better than that. And if we are incapable, those of us that are awake enough to be able to know that difference, if we're incapable of somehow figuring out a way to come together and to rebuild and to reimagine systems that are actually functional, that are actually humane, that are respectful of all human consciousness, all forms of human consciousness, neurodivergent or not, verbal or not. Some of the most brilliant people in the world have been nonverbal. And maybe there's a reason. Maybe some of the people who are neurodivergent, whose nervous systems function in a massively parallel way, maybe their evolutionary purpose is to hold frequency. Lord knows we're really good at that. Humans are quite capable of holding frequency with focus, with precision. If you give somebody the right description of words in a language that they understand, they're quite capable of tuning to a frequency. So if I say tune to the frequency of love, most of us automatically know what that is. Tune to the frequency of joy. Tune to the frequency of gratitude. So that's an interesting exercise because, yeah, you all know what that is. You know what those frequencies are. Now, if you want to get into more complex frequencies that involve things like healing, vibrational type of healings, then that requires a little bit more sophistication in terms of the physics, the descriptions, the energy, and so on. I've spent the last 27 years studying and practicing advanced metaphysics and vibrational healing. So again, these are subjects that I am happy to answer lots of questions about, whatever you're curious about. If you want to understand how some of these things work, what do these things mean? Let's talk also about what's going on in the collective consciousness. And what do I mean when I say collective consciousness? What about psychic gifting? How does that function? Lots of people have psychic gifts from the time that they were children. Almost every child has psychic gifting that is really obvious and apparent. I mean, who hasn't experienced a 4-year-old asking an embarrassing question about the family secret that nobody has talked about for generations? And boop, it just comes right out of the mouths of babes. And then the response is usually so negative that they shut their psychic gifting down and learn to function purely from the intellect, where, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you can be lied to and fooled very easily. So, these are some of the subjects that we're going to talk about, and I would love to get your feedback, your questions, and we'll see where the universe leads me for the next episode. But for now, welcome to the channel. Please like and subscribe the video. I would like to see this take off. And if anyone is interested in contacting me directly for for example, readings or counseling or spiritual counseling of any kind, energy healing, any of that kind of stuff. I absolutely work remotely, and I will leave my contact info, email contact, and so on in the description, the channel description, and probably in the video description as well. We'll see. All right. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you guys, and I look forward to the next episode.